So welcome. Hello. I'm John Torrens. I'm a communication coach, and I'm here with Alden Spiess, who is the product strategy advisor at ValueLink Pro. And we're going to have a chat all about roles and responsibilities. So I'm going to introduce myself first properly, a little bit about me. I worked in video games for about 15 years as a level designer. I also did a lot of stand-up comedy. And now I've sort of joined the two things together as a communication coach. And now I teach people how to speak with confidence, typically for presentations and pitches. And I take what I've learned from stand-up in terms of writing and delivery, and I've applied that to business. And it seems to work, which is very good. I'm a self-confessed introvert, and I almost certainly have ADHD, which adds a little spice to the mix. But Alden, tell us all about you and the work you do at ValueLink Pro.
Yep. So my background is software engineering, and then what happened was I started getting curious about why we were being asked to do the things that we were, why the business was doing this, and I asked questions. And the more that I asked, the more that I got drawn into the space of product management. So that's what I've been doing for the last something like 10, 15 years. Quite often working as an agile product owner, which is this really interesting space between product management, project management, sometimes even sales got into the mix, and then working directly with different engineering teams, from software to electronic engineering to even optical engineering. So it's been a fantastic journey. And then from that and the experience that I've got of breaking down communication barriers within these teams, I've moved into ValueLink Pro. And you may have seen the Go-to-Market Foundations page that I put together, which is trying to provide a common language for a lot of typical business problems so that everybody can go, oh, is that right? This is how we're going to work together on it.
Fantastic. So it's something I'm fascinated with is how people will remain quiet in a meeting, which I certainly did a lot of, because they don't understand. And so if someone uses a term you're not sure about, no one wants to say, oh, I didn't get it, because they think they'll look stupid. So tell me about those challenges that different roles face and that common language. What does that look like? What would be a good example of that?
So I think the problem goes a little bit deeper from not just knowing the term, because when it's a term, you can go and look it up online. But the thing is, each discipline has these kind of core challenges to the way that they approach the world and the reality that they're dealing with, that if you've never worked in that discipline, are very largely opaque to you. Something like repository management and change control. If you're a software engineer, this is a really big problem. This defines most of your working life. But if you go and look it up as a product manager, you'll find, oh, it's Git. It's just where engineers put their code. And you don't have any sense of the way that it shapes that entire worldview and all the problems that arise from it. And there are all of these challenges in each discipline that are just invisible outside of it. And one of the things that I'm trying to achieve with Go-to-Market Foundations is putting labels on that, so explaining some of the core concepts behind it, to create this kind of community where you go, oh, that's where you're coming from. Right, let's all work together. So the Go-to-Market Foundations is mostly typical business strategy problems. So it's things like, what's market fit and how do you know if you found it? Or what's a channel partner? And why on earth do we want one? And how are they valuable? Which you don't understand until you understand the role of relationship in the sales process. So I explain that too. These kind of concepts.
Fantastic. And as you're describing that, I'm immediately thinking of my experience of video games, which is quite a while ago, and how each discipline would be a little bit of a silo. And you certainly, it's possible that we say, oh, those people want this thing and that's how they operate, which of course is dreadful. And some of the best work was when we would have cross-discipline teams and they would group together and say, work on a level. And it was great because suddenly there was that understanding. So I love that. I love that idea. And I think communicating that we're all pulling in the same direction, that we all kind of want the same thing, is very good, rather than they want this and that's a natural conflict with what we want because that's not how we operate and they don't understand. I think something I was very pleased with in my own work is that I would be able to communicate effectively. So you'd have designers in one part and programmers in another. I would be able to get on with the people who were seen as difficult to get on with for whatever reason. And also another thing is that once I understood what was easy or enjoyable or effective for a programmer, then I'd see, oh, I could use that in what I'm doing. So, for example, a bit of real physics, right? If you have some real physics in a game, that might be incredibly enjoyable. And we found out, oh, the player loves this particular aspect, and it's literally just a bouncing ball, but they've spent 20 minutes playing with it. And so just getting that idea of solving problems for each other, I think is wonderful. So tell me about how the meeting happens. So in those examples, I'm thinking I've wandered over to their desk and I'm chatting to them, but let's say we're having a meeting and it's getting a deadline. So video games development was all about the deadlines and missing them. But getting these deliverables done, what does that good, effective meeting look like?
The metaphor that I love, the visual metaphor that I have in my head is a football team, right? So you've got all of the different players on the field and one of them's got the ball. And when I was like 9 years old, what happens is the entire team runs towards the person with the ball who's trying to control it and get it over the line. And that's not tremendously successful. In order for the team to function well, in order to win the game, you have to be looking at the space around you and going, who's got the opportunity, who's in the position to take the lead now, and then passing the ball effectively to them. And I think it works exactly the same way in businesses, where when there's a challenge that the business is grappling with, okay, let's talk about games design, right? You've got this little bit of level that's been tricky to figure out, and you've just nailed something that you think is going to play really well. Now it's the marketing's team, and they've spent the last 6 months working with all of the different journalists out there trying to advertise the game. What clip of the game are they going to get into those journalists' hands? This is the point at which you want to be handing over that problem to them, and also at the same time going, this is what's really cool about the thing that we've done, so that they can get the concept. Now, in your work in the games development community, how often did that transfer happen neatly?
Never. And it would be very much that we'd create the thing, and with, I guess, no accompanying communication, marketing would take it. A trailer will be made, and you think, oh, why'd they focus on that bit?
Be the wrong message to the customer. And I've got to tell you, it's not just video games. I've had that exact same thing happen to me multiple times in developing kind of far more conventional products. It's a classic problem.
Yeah. And then, so how does the meeting happen where we create that common understanding? How would you do that?
The crucial thing in the meeting is getting roles and responsibilities right. Like, roles and responsibilities are the foundation of an effective discussion, because until you know what the other person is bringing into the meeting, you don't really know what you're going to talk about. Audience is the first point of communication. So when you come into that meeting, it needs to be clear who's responsible for what. Like, exactly in that example that we were giving earlier about getting the games demo out to the journalists. Obviously, marketing is in charge of presenting that information and packaging it up, and they know the journalists, and they know the challenge of making it accessible to them and the kind of messaging that they need to know. But they might not see the intelligence and the thought and care that's gone into constructing this particular level. So the more they understand that it's the responsibility of the engineering team to explain that and to take that on board, and the more the engineering team kind of trusts them to do their job in packaging it up nicely for the journalist, the more easily this communication flow is going to happen. It's not going to work well if the engineers tell marketing how to present the information, because they just don't know that ecosystem of journalists and reporting the way that the marketing team does. But they have to have some way of handing across, and the marketing team has to be able to listen and understand, oh, that was the logic that lay behind it. So The more you can clarify these roles and say, this is the meeting where we're going to tackle the problem of what do we tell the journalists about the game, and this is your job in that meeting, the more easily those transfers of authority can happen.
Fantastic. And does that come down also then to the common challenge of a meeting, i.e., having a decent agenda, having a good chair, making sure that everything's clear?
Those are problems every business has to have, and they're problems every meeting has to solve. I think a problem that's often overlooked is agenda. Like, in an ideal world, every meeting we'd go into would have a well-defined agenda, and no business that I've ever worked in has the time to do that. So it's unrealistic and it's never going to happen. But the purpose of the meeting has to be clear, and that is entirely achievable. The other factor that's key is information flow. Meetings are the places where decisions happen, and decisions happen based on information, which allows a consensus to emerge so that everybody in the room can go, right, there is one clear answer, and we're all agreed it's this. And in that situation, the kind of key role the meeting is playing is you can all see everybody else agree, so nobody's allowed to change their mind, or at least they have to admit when it has to change, right? The second situation where you really need a meeting is there is a decision that has to be made, and it's just not clear what the right answer is. It might be aesthetic. Would I rather have the lead character of the game in a green coat or a yellow coat? There's no way to say either one of those is best, but it can only be one of them, so you've got to pick. And at that point, the meeting is all about everybody accepting that Bob is going to be the person who makes that decision, and Bob saying, I am responsible for the decision and the consequences thereof. And if anybody is going to get some fire for it, it's going to be me. And then again, the team can go out of that meeting and function effectively. So meetings exist to surface enough information until the point where you can go, either it's A, consensus, or it's B, allocated authority. And if it's B, who's going to pick up the tab? That's what we're for. If you get the role of the meeting clear, and if the flow of information is right and it's successful in the meeting, they can run very efficiently.
Fantastic. And you've reminded me there of, I think it's Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, where he talks about allowing conflict to happen. That is, in the meeting, everyone's got to say what they think, because, and I was certainly guilty of this, is I would sit there fuming and not say anything. And then a month later, we go, well, we've done this thing. And I go, oh, I hate that. Well, you had a chance to speak up, John. Why didn't you say anything?
I like to think of the company culture as being like the oil that you pour into an engine. If you get the oil right, if you get the trust right, if you get the company culture right, all of the parts can run together without friction and the engine works very effectively. And if that culture begins to break down, then what you get is an awful lot of heat and very little forward motion. And that describes too many businesses I've worked in.
That is a wonderful analogy. Please tell me it's yours. Please tell me you invented that.
It's mine. I haven't come across that anywhere else. But so that, yes, this building of trust, the more you can build trust, the easier it is for people to voice their concerns. And this, again, is where getting the meeting clearly into one of those two modes is really helpful. Because the reason why you're sitting there fuming but not thinking that you can say anything is because the function of the meeting isn't clear. If you knew that the point was to establish a consensus and you had a key piece of data and everybody else was like, right, what we're looking for is the data that will let us draw a clear conclusion, then you would have spoken up. Similarly, if you know Bob's in charge and your job is to advise Bob, but you're going to accept whatever decision Bob makes, then you're free to speak up and go, Bob, have you thought about X? And it kind of doesn't matter what Bob says at that point, right? If Bob says, yeah, I thought about it, it's a good point, but I'm ignoring you because we've got to make a call. You go, yeah, fair enough, Bob, fine with you. Somebody has to make the call and you know that it's difficult. You just want those opinions to be heard, not necessarily followed. build that trust, build that sense that people will be listened to, not blamed for speaking up, and then it all flows so much more smoothly.
Fantastic. And it does remind me, and I'm thinking the meeting I'm thinking of could be nearly 30 years ago. It's a long time ago, the beginning of my journey in games development. But I think those two things are probably true, which is we're having a company meeting. Everyone comes everyone comes. There's no clear thing. It's just the boss is going to talk about stuff. So in his head, he probably thought, yes, I'm going to update the company on what's happening, but it would be quite nebulous. And also, I guess, I think people would be afraid to speak up. They would be afraid to. I think the classic with any speaking is we're afraid of getting something wrong, or looking stupid. So there is a little bit of fear. So I love that. I love that analogy, and I think that's brilliant. And I think you need to push that even more because it makes a lot of sense. Certainly when you talk about then the friction and that he created.
One of my favorite phrases is that you can't learn anything from someone who agrees with you. I mean, you can, but not very much. So yes. In meetings, I'm always looking to draw out that dissent and the conflicting voices, because that's the data that I don't have that might change my mind and move me into a kind of more effective position. And I think, again, if you can get this structure right, where you've clearly identified who is taking responsibility for the decision, then it becomes very much in their interest to learn from everybody what the problems with that decision might be, because then they're less likely to make a mistake.
Yes, and I think one other thing I would add to that, which I really like, is just that idea of, even though there are roles and status and seniority, there's an equality or an equity, which is we all have the right to say something, and you're not necessarily going to get into trouble, but also you're not going to lose face by not knowing and learning. And so we're all trying to learn more. Wonderful, very positive.
There's an agile principle that I think is incredibly powerful that says high functioning teams don't need anybody to be in charge. And that's absolutely true, right? When the team is working well, you don't need anybody telling the team members what to do. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think they still need a leader. That leader can change depending on the situation. There's a real difference between being a leader and being in charge. The leader is the guy who goes, see that mountain? We're going to be standing on top of it and it's going to be awesome. Whereas the person who's charged says, see that river? You're the first one to cross it.
Yes, and you've immediately reminded me there. I think it's in Catching Fire Stealing Fire. There it is. Stephen Kotler, Jamie Wheel. They talk about flow state, but the example they give is, I think it's I was just at the SAS. It'll be equivalent to US military, and basically they have, whichever department it is, they have a fluid leadership, which sounds nuts. So you'll have a group of 6 people, and whoever thinks that they should take point and make the decisions does, which I can't wrap my head around, but it works, and they're dealing with lethal situations. I think that's incredible. So
exactly the flow that you want. At that point, when you've got that, what you've got is that the entire business has started to become that high-functioning team, where the leader in the moment is the person with the expertise for that moment. And think again about a football pitch, right? That's exactly how a team is working on the football pitch. The person in charge, the leader, is the one who's got the ball, and everybody's watching them and following their play. But the moment that somebody else having the ball would be the most optimal situation, then you pass it. And getting that right, that's the thing that wins you a football game.
Wonderful. I really like that. And I also like the idea of the shared glory. So someone kicks it right at the end and scores the goal, but we all got an assist. And and also the goalie being a great, so again, this is another good analogy, you definitely push that a lot, is that the goalie for a lot of the game is not doing much, but their responsibility when it comes to it is colossal, and they catch a lot of pressure. That's pressure, you can substitute another word there, if things go wrong. But if it goes right, then they're a hero and they save the game and everyone carries them out on their shoulders. So good.
You want to extend that metaphor into the business world, your goalie is a QA team.
Oh, that's nice. Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Right, I'm nicking that. That's mine now. Yes, it's the cue. That's it. Because they get into a lot of trouble, but no one celebrates if it goes well. I see exactly what you mean. They might be an unsung hero.
Real truth is that being part of a team that you trust, working together on something that's important and difficult, that's one of the most satisfying feelings that there is that you will ever have in life, right? And that's what work should be every day for everyone, because that's when you're at your most productive.
Yes, 100%. Fantastic. Thank you very much. We should do this again.
Indeed. Thank you very much, John.
Cheers, Alden. Thanks.